Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with N. West Moss to discuss her new memoir, Flesh and Blood, Reflections on Infertility, Family, and Creating a Bountiful Life, published by our friends at Algonquin Books. N. West Moss has published a collection of short stories, and her award-winning essays and poems have appeared in the New York Times, Salon.com, McSweeney's, and many other publications. She has a certificate in narrative medicine and works at a university in New Jersey, where she lives. To moderate this afternoon's conversation, we're joined by Theresa Brown, registered nurse, the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Shift, who has been a contributor to the New York Times. Her writing appears on CNN.com and in the American Journal of Nursing, the Journal of American Medical Association, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Her first book was Critical Care, and during what she calls her past life, she received a PhD in English from the University of Chicago. She lectures nationally and internationally on issues related to nursing, healthcare, and end of life. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Flesh and Blood from Books and Books below. We truly appreciate every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm
Hello.
really happy to be
Hello.
here. Hi, Theresa.
Hi, West. So we're going to talk for a little bit and then take questions. And I just want to let people know I was at a university, but virtually I'm a little bit hoarse. So I'm drinking tea with honey, but I also think, you want writers to be drinking tea, right?
Yes, so, it's very in character. And can I just say before we start, I hope everyone will support Books and Books. I can't imagine life without our amazing independent bookstores. So yes, certainly buy my book and Theresa's book, but if you have any books you need to buy, I hope you'll buy them from Books today.
That's a great, yes. I agree with that. Thank you. Yeah. So if you all haven't seen the book, here's my, it's upside down and backwards. But it's an amazing cover to go with an amazing book. And West and I both feel like just through me reading the book and us talking about it, we have become friends, which is lovely. And I think you will feel like you're her friend after you read the book. So I thought we'd go big picture, first of all, and a tiny, tiny bit of a spoiler that you say in the book that I won't even say where, you write this book during a brief time when you're in Europe. Let's just say you're in Europe. And I wondered, when did you first get the idea to write the book? And if, wherever you want to start that, if you want to go back more and talk about your writing career, if there was a moment, whatever, just.
Well, in case this might be an inspiration for anyone out there, I've always written for myself, but I didn't start writing for publication until I was about 49. I got my MFA at 49. I'm 57. My first book came out at 52. And
wow.
So yeah, I started, I'm a late bloomer at everything. And it just so happens now being 57, everything's blooming. So it's good. It's a nice time in my life. But to answer your question, I always have written for myself to understand the world. So I don't tend to sit down and write in my journal when everything's copacetic. I tend to sit down and write when things are rough. I remember being, a teenager and writing about breakups and crushes and people in school who were mean. That writing helped me make sense of things. It was a kind of catharsis for me. And so it was very natural for me to want to write about my illness when I was going through it and trying to understand what was happening to my body and being upset at some caregivers and not knowing how to sort of mediate that. So initially it was just for me, as all my writing is initially. It's just for me. I think it was Stephen King who said, we write the first draft
Yes.
for ourselves and then the second draft for everyone else. Well, first draft is for me, and then the 8 kajillion other drafts are for the ones where I'm trying to get it right for them. So initially it was just sort of keeping track of how my mind changed when I was ill, and it changed the way I perceived the world was interestingly changed pretty dramatically. And then after the illness was over and I was grappling, I felt pretty strong writing short stories and essays. But I did not feel as confident with long form. I had attempted a novel that was in a drawer because I couldn't quite get it to work. And I was still very interested in exploring the illness that I'd been through. And I realized illness is a great frame for story, right? Because there's that sort of natural arc of symptom and then the detective work of trying to figure out what the symptoms accumulate to mean. And then what happens once you have a diagnosis, that's a kind of often, or was for me, a kind of clarity, a galvanizing moment, and treatment, and then for me, recovery. And so when I had kind of healed after a couple of months, I wasn't 100%. I did get invited to house sit in Europe, and it was there after a big crisis. I got completely lost in the city I was in. I'm keeping it a secret. I don't know if I'm supposed to keep it a secret.
Yeah, I started that too. I don't know if it needs to be a secret.
It's very exciting, though. I feel like I hope people will try to guess where we were.
Exactly.
But I got horribly lost, and then got very sick. Not very sick, but I got sick enough that I just had to sort of retreat back home in the city I was staying in, the mystery city. And it was then after this sort of collapse that I wrote the first draft of what was this book. And I think that happens. I don't know. Do you find that there's something, I don't know. It's like an earthquake or something. When I finally break the code on a piece that I'm working on, it's almost like you have to sink kind of low to then climb back out through the writing. That's how it felt for me.
Yeah, and just to give people a brief sense of the book, that West had a very rare condition that there's no other way to say it, bleeding vaginally, like bleeding a lot. And there was the deduction of what is this, what's going on, and then having hysterectomy. None of this is giving anything away. And the real beauty and amazing thing about the book isn't the plot. I mean, the plot, it's very interesting. She's very clear about what's happening, but all the personal revelations, the kindnesses, just her ability to slow down and even talk about that. There's just a beauty really to everything in the book. And, even when you said everything's blooming, I'm looking at your picture and you've got a shirt with flowers embroidered on it. It looks like you've got a vase with flowers. I can see sunflowers. And that's sort of how the book feels like, just a sort of opening up of beauty in the midst of this sad story that when one first gives the details about it, someone might just say, oh, yuck, I don't want to read about that. But you do want to read about it the way that West writes about it, because it's so real and meaningful and rich, just rich. And even think you telling the story about having this collapse and getting completely lost reminded me of the cab driver, right? Who's so incredibly kind to you when you're lost.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all of that, Theresa. In one way, it is an illness memoir, right? That is the frame of it. But I could say it's really a lot of different things. And one is very much about, first of all, there's humor in the book. So I hope it doesn't sound like it's too lugubrious. It's
Right.
also funny in the way that life is just everything at once, right? But one of the things that did occur to me as I was going through this illness is how often, almost constantly, I was met with so much generosity and kindness. So, and even now, here we are with Books and Books being very generous, and Theresa here. And those flowers are from the book launched last week. And so someone brought over the sunflowers. And then last night, two former students were at an event I was at, and they brought me those roses.
Oh,
I know. So I just feel like, it was, as illness can be, a moment for people to step up. And I do think people love to step up. Not everyone, but a lot of people are out there looking for the chance to care for us. And for some reason, I was very walled off from that before my illness. But it was somehow awoken in me when I finally shared with the world what was going on, that I was having this sort of taboo stuff happening that's hard to talk about. I was met with generosity from strangers, from the medical world, from family and friends, from neighbors. There are monks who live in an abbey down the road who were, just an example of, the magic of the world. And there's something funny that happened to me, and maybe this will resonate with some of the people who are here today. My mind slowed down a lot when I was sick. It had to. I couldn't, my hemoglobin levels were really low. I'd been bleeding for months and months and months. And even after surgery, the bleeding didn't stop. And I was thinking about this just last night, that it's almost as though there was a whole world going on that I could never see because I was moving so quickly. And that when I was forced to slow down, all of a sudden I was able to see all the helpers in the world, all just the natural world sprung alive to me in a new way, even though I'd always taken solace in the natural world. But it just, I saw a world that I'd never seen before. And also I got to see, I think everyone experiences this. I suddenly realized there are all of these sick people around, and I never noticed them. In the grocery store, the people who are moving slowly. I was suddenly that person who was having trouble pushing my shopping cart from the store up a very slight incline to my car. And it made me look around the world and go, wow, there are all of these people who have been invisible to me all this time, who are struggling in one way or another. It just sort of lit up this whole other world for me in a really lovely way.
Yeah, and I think, it's also something about American culture, right? We keep going, we soldier on,
right.
And
right. But productivity is like this weird.
Yes.
You gotta be productive. And when you suddenly can't be productive, you realize productivity is not all it's cracked up to be.
That's true. Yeah. And just because I partially dislocated my kneecap several years ago now. And, even when I was done with crutches, I moved really slowly, and I would feel like crossing the street, like I would see a car coming and they would probably think I could move faster, and I couldn't move any faster.
Right.
And then thinking, like, now when I see someone slowly crossing the street, I remember and I think, oh, maybe they're hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it amazing? That's such a great story, because if we go through it the right way, it awakens our empathy. We become better human beings through our struggles. And I do think that people who have no struggles, I wonder, Or they, like I think I'm more drawn to people who have gone through struggles just because they tend to be more, not always, but tend to be more empathetic, and have a sense of humor about things. And that I think that can be sort of the crucible in which we become more fully human.
Very nice. I like that. Yeah.
Thank you. I dredged up the word crucible. I think
it's a great word too.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. I want points for that. Extra credit.
Yeah. A+. Well, talking about relationships, and the women in this book are such a big part of it, and so I wanted to read the dedication because it's so lovely and really made me think a lot about the women, my ancestors, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Who I know very little about. So it was just great that you know actually a lot. So here's the dedication to the book: for my mother and her mother and her mother and her mother. And the last "her" is in italics and just very nice. So and Wes's mother was just wonderful while she was sick. And some of the parts of the book I found the most lovely were when she's talking about her mother and how her mother took care of her. But I know you have strong feelings about why you wrote about the women who came before you.
Well, just you reading it out loud to me is nice, because, I can hear it with a little remove. And I don't know if my mom's here today because I can't see who's in the audience. But she's been coming to a lot of these, which is so great. She's now 88. And even if she's not here, I can say she's one of my favorite people. Really, truly, she's amazing. And I got very lucky in the mom department. She did take care of me, and that was an amazing experience at 50, whatever I was, 52 or 53, to have your very loving mother come at 84 and take care of you. It's almost like I needed a refresher course in taking care of myself. It was quite amazing because I had somehow forgotten the ways that little things can bring so much joy. So she's a martini drinker and has cocktails every night, just about. And it's a big ritual. So even when I was sick, we had cocktail time. I didn't have alcohol, but she would, find some beautiful little fresh juice and put it in a wine glass. And we would sit together and she would, just cut up a pear or something. And it would be this beautiful moment in the midst. I'd get myself up out of bed if I could, and we'd sit and I'd be bundled up in coats because I was freezing. And we would sit together and do that. So she, I got a lot out of that. But also I realize now there's this lovely irony about dedicating this to all of the mothers who came before me, because it's also a book about not being able to become a mother, right? Not being able to have children, and yet I'm still quite in love with the beauty of motherhood, right? And caring, how we the gestures of caring. I'm very interested in the ways, not how people speak necessarily, but in the book, there's an orderly when I go into the operating room for my surgery, and I'm just wide awake, and my heart is just thudding. And I had to sort of screw up my courage and say to this complete stranger, "Would you hold my hand?" And he did. He had his little latex gloved hand, and he just stopped whatever he was doing and held my hand for probably 5 seconds. And I just felt my blood pressure just like these small gestures of caring, very powerful. So my mom was full of that. My husband is great with that kind of thing too. But I also, at one point in the book, sort of described how I feel like not having children, part of the my sorrow about it is that I'm not continuing the line of these women who came before. And so the book ultimately felt like my attempt to not only try to make something beautiful out of something that's sad, but also to try and contain their legacy. So I'm not telling their stories to my children, but I'm sort of giving their stories or what I know of them to the reader. And that felt like the best thing I could do for them. That the book is in large measure for their legacy.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And can you talk about Grandma Hastings and how she set up her room when she came to live with you?
Grandma Hastings, I read a review of the book that said I only knew her for 1 year. That's not completely true. She came and lived with us the last year of her life. So I grew up knowing her, but that last year I was 5 years old to 6 years old, and she lived with us. And it was profound for me in ways, obviously, I didn't know at the time. Like I'm wearing her wedding ring.
Oh, wow.
My mom gave me her wedding ring for when my husband and I got married. And I have, without trying to, I've thought of her every single day of my life. She had a very big impact on me. And when she moved in, it was a busy, loud, frenetic household with 4 kids under 15 and dogs and cats and chickens and rabbits. And I think we even had a few pet snakes upstairs and for my brothers. And so she was in her 80s and she moved into this house and I was the littlest and I needed attention and she needed to be needed, I think. And we fell in love, I would say. So she took one of those Hallmark cards, just a greeting card of a dove with an olive branch in its mouth. And she thumbtacked it to her door and she gathered us kids around and said, this is the room of peace. I think she didn't want us, coming in there and screaming and fighting and giggling and doing all that stuff. Well, the way I interpreted that as the littlest kid who was being chased everywhere all the time, that was the safe space. If I could get in there, nobody could tickle me, nobody could chase me. And I would go to her room halfway across this big old house. When I couldn't sleep at night, I would go sleep in her bed and she would tell me stories. She taught me to read. She made me a little book, which I have here. I can show it.
Oh, wow.
She made me a little tiny book and taught me to read that year. So we had a lot of profound moments, but she ended up being a character in this book just because I was thinking about her so much. When I was 6, she also wanted to be a doctor and studied biology. When she went to Sophie Newcomb, which was the sister college of Tulane, and studied biology and even worked in a lab. She was proud because she could identify typhoid on slides.
That's right.
Yeah. So she was this she was pretty influential in our family. She made us interested, even in gory details. She dissected a frog for all of us when I was a kid, and she was pragmatic. And I think in many ways, the tone of the book that's just kind of straightforward about what's happening is a tone I like to think she would approve of.
Oh, wow.
It's not squeamish. It's accepting and straightforward and inquisitive. And I think I got that from her.
Yeah, well, and the whole idea of a refuge and you interpreting the dove as, this once I'm in this room, nobody can pick on me, right?
Yeah,
and then it makes sense that when you were very ill, you would be dwelling on that, but this time you had a husband and a mom to help make your whole house a refuge.
The whole house was a refuge, and yet for some, I'm rustling papers right now because I'm looking to see if I have her little book. I do. The little book she made me.
Oh, show us.
There it is. Can you see that? And there's the little,
Yes.
I have it all. I know that she would write a little sentence and then I would illustrate it. And I was quite the artist. I was 5. So,
That's
I mean,
great.
and she sewed, she actually sewed the binding and everything. She was someone who paid attention to details just like my mom is. And
Wow.
I'm not always as much that way as they are. So yeah, that's one of my little treasures.
Yeah, such a
Wanted
great
to read with
story.
you. Yeah.
Well, on Twitter, I promised that we would also talk about a praying mantis named Claude.
So,
It was another one of my favorite presences in the book. That's part of what's great about the book is West can weave together this loving, nurturing grandmother, and then also the importance of a praying. She mostly stayed in the sunroom of their house, praying mantis, who she honestly found kind of weird and icky in a certain way, right?
yeah.
But also,
I mean, they're hideous.
Yeah.
They're hideous and fascinating all at the same time. Yeah. Well, Claude was an interesting addition to our lives. And in addition to the book, I've had people ask me sometimes at book signings over the years, when did you put the symbolism in? So I think sometimes people think you like draft 3, and now I'm going to add in symbolism. But for me, anyway, it doesn't happen that way. It happens more like I write the book and then I step back from it and I go, oh, how interesting. And Claude was one of those moments where I went, oh, I'm keeping that in. How interesting, how neatly that fits. So the story with him was he was in the sunroom. The sunroom was falling off the house. Like it's an old room, but it's got a lot of windows, and so looking out into nature. Perfect. And so we camped out in there, and there was a praying mantis, a giant, like 7-inch praying mantis who was in the sunroom. And Mom and I, became a running joke that we always had to locate. We named him Claude. And then for some reason that cracked me up. I thought he was French, and I built this whole persona that I still have in my mind with a
I loved it. Yeah, right.
We always wanted to locate him because he was both fascinating, and the idea of if he ever lands in my hair, I'm slapping him to death.
Yeah,
right. Like, I mean, I love Claude, but I won't be.
You don't want him in your bed, right?
No, I don't want him getting on my face. I don't. It's going to be bad. But at any rate, so he was in there the whole time. And I was pretty much living in the sunroom for months, unexpectedly. I had complications, and I finally had the energy to do a little research into praying mantids. And it turned out that Claude was not Claude. Claude was not a female. I mean, Claude was not a male. Claude was a female, because at that time of the year, any praying mantis still alive was likely to be a female who was going to be laying an egg sac anytime soon. So Mom, being a badass, picked up Claude, which I don't think I would have done. I think I would have put on welding gloves before I, but she just picked him up and put him in the azalea bush, and he immediately set to work extracting this egg sac from his abdomen and creating, something that's about that big. It took hours and hours. Wow. So at any rate, we knew immediately then, right? Oh, Claude's female. But we decided we can't change how we perceive Claude now. Claude is always going to be Claude. And later, I realized there's a lot of interesting gender stuff in the book. Because right here I am, my uterus is removed. And I'm contemplating, what does that mean for me in terms of my own gender, my own feelings about my femininity and my body and my attractiveness and all of those things that do come to mind, and feeling, perplexed, I guess, and that obviously what I'm looking at in the world, I'm sort of projecting that onto. So I think Claude was a really good example of this gender complexity that I was grappling with. And then I reread the piece that ended up, it's a humor piece in the middle of it that ended up in McSweeney's. And that's all very bizarrely, tapping into my subconscious about that, where I'm talking about Winston Churchill's vagina in this humor piece. Anyone who's listening right now, it's an unusual book. I'm sorry. I don't know. There are things that are sad, and there are things that are weird, and there are things that are funny. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like Claude ended up making sense to me as part of the story, not just as this character who, we were amused by at the time, but he also sort of carried some of the narrative weight and the symbolic weight in ways I didn't understand at first.
Definitely. Yeah. And listening to you talk about it, I'm realizing you have this visitor who is not totally welcome. I mean, it's not the same as your illness, but kind of feels it kind of feels that way.
Yeah, I think so.
And then at a point, the relationship changed. Claude or Claudette had to go lay eggs, and you did get better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Claude, died, as they do after they give birth. And actually just this year, I don't know if anyone cares about this, but there are 2 egg sacs outside in my garden. I look for them now because we have like great-great-grandchildren of Claude, I guess, out in the garden. And it's a great place for them. So yeah, there are 2 on 2 different plants.
That's amazing. I care about that.
Well,
I honestly do.
Yeah. Well, that's all I care about.
Okay.
And I'm happy.
So I had one. So this is the nurse in me, I think, asking, because after West's hysterectomy, she was fine. And then, like she said, had some complications and was bleeding again. Did you, and you have such an appreciation of your physicians, of what they were able to do, but you also clearly portray them as people, you don't idealize them. Did you ever feel like, why can't they just figure this out? Like, why can't they?
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure what's happening, so I am going to try to get them back on here again.
Hi.
Hey, I'm not sure what happened.
I'm not sure either. But I was here the whole time and I could hear you.
Okay, good. I wasn't even sure. I was like sitting here trying to think.
I'm glad I was able to come back and.
There you go.
I just read Sophie's question. I'm all excited about it, but
sorry.
No.
These are virtual event times. Yeah.
So this is, I consider this normal to have something not work. So
Exactly. Okay, I'll let you get to it.
But you were asking a question about my doctors.
Yeah. Did you ever, you portray yourself as being patient with them, which must have been so hard because you were becoming anemic. And did you ever feel like, why can't they just figure this out? What's wrong with them?
Well, I never felt like what's wrong with them.
Okay.
Because I think they were as upset as I was. This was unusual. And I don't, these were doctors who had done this kind of surgery many, many times. And we were really trying to avoid me having to go back into surgery.
Right.
And I could tell, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I could tell that they loved me. And I, not like they weren't in love with me, but they cared, and we were friends, and we were all trying to figure it out. I was trying to be a good patient, and they were doing everything they could do short of going back under the knife.
Right.
Because what were we going to do at that point? They were going to have to dig around, and I was pretty sick. It didn't feel like that was a good option. So no, I trusted them. I also, I was impatient with the situation.
Of course. Yeah.
I never felt like these guys are just smoking in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And they're not paying attention. And hello, I'm here. No, they were concerned, and I saw them every day for a while.
Right.
We all got very comfortable with each other and hilarious sometimes, and it was I hope they see this book. I think I caused them to retire. 2 of them retired right after, and I should try to find them because they were lovely. And one of them actually helped me through all of my miscarriages too.
Yeah. Well, maybe they retired because they thought we will never have a patient as wonderful as West,
Totally.
So let's just hang it up. Yeah.
Obviously. I didn't want to say it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But that's great because it really shows the power of you feeling like they cared about you rather than you sort of felt like, oh, they did the operation. You're still bleeding. We don't know why, I've got another appointment,
Right.
So again, that human touch. And
there were moments during the whole odyssey where there were a few little moments, not with those doctors, where you just do feel unseen and unimportant and kind of like a number. And that's a terrible feeling. I did not ever feel that way with my doctors. They knew me, and they knew my husband. Like, we had some hilarious things trying to cram everyone into the little room with me in the stirrups, and they're trying to stop the bleeding, and my husband's there taking notes, and they have to push him into the little changing closet.
Right.
And then he scared the hell out of one of the doctors because they didn't know he was in there. And he asked a question from behind the curtain. Poor Dr. B.
Yeah.
Jumped, a couple of feet in the air. It was fabulous. But no, maybe I learned this from my mother too. Having faith in people. I'm not a naive person. I know when people are jerks, and there are people who I find their energy I don't want in my life. So that's real. But mostly expecting the best from people and really expecting it, I find in my teaching and in my life, people step up. People are pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
What doctor? I don't think that I'm sure there's some orthopedic surgeon somewhere who's a real jerk. But most people who are in medicine are not in there to be jerks or even in there to make big bank. I don't believe. I think they're in there because they want to help people.
Yeah.
And that if you can see them as more fully human, it helps them to see you as more fully human.
That sounds good too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. I just was curious about that. And that's a very impressive, gracious answer. I'm going to go now to.
I forget what Sophie's question was, but it was something I liked.
Let me see. Okay. Sorry. Took me a minute to, as we've established, not knowing what's going on virtually is normal. Okay. So this is from Sophie. How did you balance sharing your personal journey with health, healing, and holding certain details for yourself? And how did you know you were ready to share this part of your journey? That is quite a lovely question.
It is a lovely question. Way to go, Soph.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think I hid anything. I still feel like I have my privacy. And even when you write a whole book, right, and this is 320 pages, but with a lot of sort of white space, the chapters are super short. It's only a snapshot of your life. There's no way to ever really know the secret of anyone's marriage or day-to-day life. So I do still feel like, I know that sounds weird because, I talk about everything, but I still feel like I have me, and that's all sacred. I will say, though, that I was very careful, as I am, about involving anyone else's story in my story. So you purposefully do not get any information about other people's fertility struggles, whether it be in my family or in my friend circle. I decided the line for me was I wanted to tell my story and make it so that anyone else in the story could have the freedom to tell their own story if they ever decided to. That I would not in any way try to tell anyone else's story. And that was actually very helpful for me because it just cut out a whole bunch of stuff. I didn't have to explain this or explain that. And in my life, I have a lot of support for my writing. So Mom got to read every draft that she wanted to read. And I've always told her and my husband, if you want me to cut anything out, I'd be happy to, because it involves them. They are exposed in the book.
Right. So
they got full say, although my husband just asked me to change one word, which was when we first, in a miscarriage years ago, when we first learned that there was no longer a heartbeat, we're second trimester. I had in the original that Craig had gasped at that news. And Craig, when he read that, said, I did not gasp. I sighed.
Oh.
Which is beautiful, right? Isn't that a nice difference?
It is.
It's a real writerly edit, and it's subtle, and he was right, and I changed it. And that was the only change either of them asked me to make. So I'm lucky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But they're also, he's loving this book launch because a lot of people are saying how great my husband is. So
right.
he's like, yeah, go ahead, write that piece about how fabulous I am. Feel free.
Well, and people should know this comes very near the start, but West writes that Craig, if she would get up from the bed in the middle of the night, every time she came back, he would lift up the quilt for her, which she thought was just loved, and thought this was, I think you even used the word courtship, right? Like this was courtship behavior.
Well,
you talk about that. Yeah.
Well, I thought at the beginning of our relationship that was a courtship thing, right? That, whatever time you get back into bed,
right,
he's up and he's holding the corner up for you. But I can't remember anymore. We've been married or together 17 years, something like that. And he still does it every single time.
Wow.
I don't know if he's now just doing it because he has to, but I don't care. But talk about gestures of caring. I'm also a fiction writer. And so we're always telling ourselves and telling students this sort of overused adage of show, don't tell.
Right.
And I feel like that's a really, really good example of the difference. If I tell you that I feel loved by my husband, you kind of go, okay. But if I tell you that every single night for 17 years, every time I get into bed, he reaches out and holds up the corner of the blanket, I think that gesture is a demonstration of care. And probably you as a nurse know you can say things, but probably the way you let people know they're cared for is probably through gesture and face, and you use your whole body to demonstrate care, just like that orderly holding my hand.
Yes.
So I'm very interested in the gestures, the sort of embodied sense of how we are loved and cared for by, family, but also strangers and clinicians, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know about empathy.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And I think we can take this last question. How long did you work on the book? And I should say, I always have a very hard time when people ask me this question, because it's so like, well, there was this part and then this part, and I can't really put it all the time together.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, I mean, it is a hard question, but I was sick about 4 years ago, I think, maybe 5 years ago. I write a lot of drafts. For any of you who are writers out there and feeling disheartened, I write a lot of drafts because I enjoy it, not because someone's cracking the whip. I feel like with enough work, I'm capable of making a sentence do exactly what I want it to do, but it takes me time. So I tend to write about 50 drafts of things literally before I send them out. And so it was about 50 drafts before I got an agent. I tried to get an agent and then got an agent. And then he had a few notes and I wrote a few more drafts. And then I got to work with Amy Gash at Algonquin she's your editor too.
Yeah.
She's an incredible editor and I feel very lucky because I knew that she loved the book, so that we worked for a whole year on it. And I never once felt like she was trying to make it anything except for just more itself, if you know what I mean. So she never said, cut this out. It was more like questions. I don't know. We worked a whole year on it. So a lot of time. By the same token, whoever asked that question, I'm always working on a lot of projects at the same time because they are all in different stages. So I have a middle grade novel that got purchased recently.
Oh,
Yay.
congratulations.
And thank you. And I'm going to be starting in working on that with my editor there at Little Brown. And so I imagine I'll be working on that. But meanwhile, I'm also drafting a one-act play, and I have a novel for adults. So they're all in these different stages of doneness. And actually, it's really nice to be able to, work on a draft of Flesh and Blood with Amy, and then spend a few days working on a middle grade novel. Right? That is kind of it's a palate cleanser, and it also gives me a little bit of narrative distance from what I've been working hard on.
Right.
So it's sort of like, it took me about 4 years to finish the book, but I sold it maybe 2 years after I started drafting it. And then it takes a while to get from purchase to publication. And I would say my biggest regrets as a writer are when I send out my work too early. And I used to do that a lot. Like I get really anxious and I think this is good. And I would send it out and kind of squander the read from an editor, So now I feel more patient, although not that patient, but more patient. And I try to just wait until it really feels ready. And then I share it. With people.
Great answer. Apologies to Talia. We are supposed to, well, actually, no. We can actually, let's do this last question.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
There's a question from Talia?
Yeah. Yay. Yeah, because I remembered we don't have to stop at one particular time. Since the book is so personal and intimate about your life in many aspects, was there a reason you decided to go beyond the first draft for yourself? And was it hard to go over these events again? It's a very, very, very good question. Yeah.
That is a good question. And I think it may be different for other memoirists. But I found that I was already obsessed with this because I was living through it. And that being obsessed with it in writing, almost felt like medicine. It's like there's something quite powerful about taking something traumatic and being the author of that story rather than kind of the unwilling participant in the story, right? I'm the author of it and not the victim of it. And I'm getting to shape it and make it into something beautiful was helpful for me ultimately. And in fact, at this point, because there was a certain point after doing so many drafts where I, was just sort of so unemotional about it. Right. I was just sort of being a crafts person that I was even a little sick of the story. And I thought, that is great. That is so great to be beyond the grief, so far beyond the grief that now I can think of the shape of this chapter. I do, I've led some workshops for senior citizens and for veterans, and I've worked with Penn Prison Writing Project.
Oh, wow.
Helping people shape their stories. And I do think that while we are, just to go to her question, I think we're mostly scared of writing the story before we start writing it. It's almost like that monster under the bed, right? If you turn on the lights and actually go under the bed, it's a dust bunny, it turns out, right? Or it's something that's actually, it's mostly scary when it's just in our imagination and when we're trying to avoid it. And then once we finally face it, yes, I did shed tears when I was writing early drafts, and I laughed in early drafts. But it was not painful. It was not additionally painful, right? What I was going through was hard, but the writing was like sewing up a wound or something. It felt really good and healing for me. So I know, there are different kinds of trauma, and I'm sure, that the different writers feel differently about it. But for me, I also think whatever we are obsessed with as writers has to be what we write about. Because, right, it takes 4 years to get a book to publication. You better be really, really, really interested in it.
Yeah, that's true.
Or you're going to lose the will to keep editing and polishing. I remained pretty interested all the way through. So, maybe you've had this feeling, but sometimes it's the story I'm avoiding telling that I should be telling. So I remember being in a class, again, at 48 or something, creative nonfiction class, and our teacher saying to, come in with a piece of creative nonfiction for next class's workshop. And I was writing the most boring stuff. It just wasn't happening. And it was almost as though I heard a figurative knock at the door, and it was your miscarriages, right? This thing I hadn't told anyone about and hadn't shared at all. And I was like, that's the story you're avoiding. And the minute I see that I'm avoiding a story, that's where I point my ship. Like, nope, let's get this over with, kind of. And it turns out those often are the stories that matter the most to us, right? The ones that we're scared of a little, or that make us feel deeply.
Yeah, that's. So I have a book coming out in April about me having breast cancer and having been an oncology nurse. And just what you were saying resonates so much with me. I remember at points writing the book and feeling like I was living with the fear. And but at this point, like you, I feel like, and the book is even called Healing, but I feel like ultimately the process was healing for me. So, yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to read your book.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really excited about it.
And I think we're going to wrap up, but I wanted to read, this is on page 2 of the book. It's just so lovely. We do not always choose who walks with us, who we will find ourselves leaning on in times of duress. And I just want to say, for anyone who buys this book, you will feel like you're walking with Wes, but also she's letting you walk with her. And there's just so much to learn from this book about life and caring and praying mantises and, drinking out of little teacups and just really, really lovely. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, just as a final word, that you were reminding me, someone said to me, what did you want this book to be? And I realized after publication, I really just want it to be a friend for people who are going through not necessarily infertility, but maybe illness, or maybe someone they love who's going through it. I want it to be a friend for sure.
Can you hold up the cover again for us?
Yeah.
Theresa? There we go. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's Raul Colon is the artist.
Oh my God, it's lovely.
Isn't that beautiful? And
Yeah.
actually, there's a whole painting that he did that has a head, and it's he was illustrating, ironically, the myth of Pandora's box.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wild? I know. And I've been in touch with him. I wanted to buy the original, but I think it's already been sold. But it's a beautiful, beautiful painting.
I think sometimes that's what illness is like a whole Pandora's box.
Yes, isn't that?
Oh, yes.
Right?
I
That
know.
you open and it's like all hell breaks loose.
Metaphors
Yes.
And
everywhere.
it's,
Yes.
well, I know, whatever it is that you make of it. And you obviously have had a major awakening as a result of that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing the book, your thoughts, the insight. Thank you, Theresa, for your questions,
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
moderating. Looking forward to Healing when it comes out in
Yeah,
April.
me too. Me too.
Open invitation to come back and
Thank
see
you.
us at that time. And then just to remind everyone who's watching that if you don't already have a copy, you can order it from Books and Books. There's a button right there below. If you're in Miami and you want to come by one of our stores and pick it up, we have it there as well. And just, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you, book lovers and Books and Books and Theresa. What a nice hour.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you, everyone.